So first of all, I just want to thank Jeff and everybody at Canary. You guys are a tremendous resource, not just for the clean tech industry, but for mainstream media throughout California and even, the energy nerd public at least, but you are a tremendous resource. So thank you. And thank you for having this event, and being able to be in person again is just a huge, huge thrill for me. I also want to give additional extra props to Senator Becker. I think it's appropriate. You're to the far left from the audience point of view, by the way.
Thank you for that. You feel better.
Just unquestionably one of our biggest champions and deep thinkers on energy. So it's a real asset, incredible honor to share a stage with you, Senator. So CALSA, the California Solar and Storage Association, we are focused on the distributed side of the solar and energy storage market. I want to take it up high level. I've been thinking about this a lot. California sets goals really well. And lately, we've been really focused on electrification. So in order to meet our goals, California needs to sell 1 million electric cars every year. We need to sell pretty much 1 million heat pumps every year. We have invested billions of dollars in driving electrification. And as a result of that, we anticipate our electricity load is going to at least double just from our electrification initiatives in the next couple of years. And that's not counting any kind of impact climate change has on electricity consumption. In order to meet that, California needs to add 6 gigawatts of renewable energy and energy storage every year, 6 gigawatts. And that needed to start yesterday and be sustained for the next 10 to 15 years if we're going to keep the lights on and meet our clean energy goals. We have never built that much renewable energy in California. And we are about half that right now in averaging it, and that's a good year. Can we do it? Absolutely, but all of our different markets need to be running at full steam. And the distributed market, this is a really, I think, important fact for everybody to understand. It is California's largest renewable energy market. The distributed solar, rooftop solar market is the largest renewable energy market in California. And the largest battery in the world is not at Moss Landing. It's actually hanging on garage walls all around the state. The potential for our communities and everybody individually, as well as our municipalities and our businesses, to participate in the clean energy revolution is tremendous. It is not a nice little niche sideshow. It's not the only thing. We need all of it. We need community solar, we need utility scale, we need electrification, but we absolutely can't stumble on this important solar resource that can be brought to scale and at speed. And now California just announced, just put in place major changes to the number one driver to that market, which was net metering. And we just got data today that shows that sales are down 80% across the state. And that's during our summer months. These are supposed to be the months that get us through the rest of the year. So how do we meet our electrification goals? How do we decarbonize California if the largest renewable energy market just got gutted 80%? And we can talk more about where we go from there, but California needs to get back to the place of investing in innovation, encouraging development, and removing barriers. And unfortunately, even for the other renewable energy markets, but especially with distributed, we have kind of turned all of that on its head, and we need to get back to that place.
Thanks, Bernadette. I know that net metering is a controversial and much fought over topic. And Senator Becker, I know that your slate of bills that are coming out of this year's legislative session tackle both the distributed and kind of centrally procured side of things. I wonder if you could help us understand how you see the challenge of kind of hitting these very ambitious goals, how you see, state mandates driving that, how you see application essentially of those mandates by state agencies driving that, and where you see the alignment of that policy coming in working with the way that the markets work and the way that the private sector invests, and where you think it needs improvement, and where are the key gaps, and how are you trying to address them?
Yes, well, I have a lot of thoughts on that. First of all, I'll just say it's great to be here. Thanks to Canary for pulling this together. And this feels like one of probably hundreds of clean energy meetups that I've been to over the years in my role, either as a clean energy investor, as a entrepreneur, as co-founder of Clean Tech for Obama with some folks here, and going way back when to 1992, when I helped EPA do the first Clean Air Marketplace conference at that time. So it's fun to see many people here I've known for a long time, and looking forward to meeting new people as well. And the great news, as you said, like there's lots of good news in California, and I'd say after a few years of really probably not doing a lot of super ambitious legislation, many people felt, Mayor Creasman from Environment California said last year was the most impactful year for climate legislation in California history. And then this year was a very big year as well from a variety of standpoints, everything from corporate disclosure, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, the corporate risk climate risk disclosure that the SEC should have done 10 years ago, to kind of the nuts and bolts and some of the stuff that I want to talk about in answer to your question. But the big picture is still that, for all the good things we've done, we're reducing emissions about 1% a year. And even to hit our own 2030 goals, we got to be reducing emissions 4 to 5% a year. So there's a lot we have to do and a lot we have to get right. And I'll talk a lot today about distribution and transmission bottlenecks, because I think that's one of the things that you alluded to in your question. But other things we have to fix, like the stats that we just heard from Bernadette about the destruction of, to be not too dramatic, but really the body blow to our rooftop solar business from net energy meeting from NEM 3. So we got a lot of work to do this year. Can we wonk out here? I think it's a wonky group, right? From people that I know here. So yeah, again, a lot of this is transmission and distribution upgrades, and how do we actually connect things to the grid and make sure the grid is going to be able to onboard all that we need. So like last year, I had a bill that had the CEC and the PUC working more closely with CAISO on coordination on transmission. And this year, the CAISO approved $7.5 billion of transmission projects, about 45 different transmission projects. And that was exactly what we wanted to do, right? That was a big step forward to say, okay, we have to actually do planning for all this we're going to need. But the question is, again, how do we continue to fix the bottlenecks, especially locally? So in my district, it takes about 70 weeks, which is hard to believe, like 70 weeks to get things connected, to get new charging infrastructure, for example, connected to the grid. We all know about the hospitals and buildings, or just people's home energy upgrades, right? That they can't get connected to the grid. And hopefully new technology that was talked about earlier is going to help us remove the necessity of some panel upgrades. But the bottom line is we have to do a much better job. So I had a bill this year, after 3 years of trying, this kind of finally became a crisis. I think there was 8 bills in the legislature, and sort of my bill is the one that moved forward, bringing together the workforce development piece, the accountability for our utilities, actually standards and accountability for them, and then some interim rate making so we can actually fund in a super targeted way with lots of guardrails all that we need to do to fill this massive backlog of things that we have to connect to the grid. So that's really what we've got to do. Like this year was like a super nuts and bolts kind of meat and potato a year in a lot of those ways. But as you said, with the EV fleet growth that we've seen and the medium and heavy duty trucks, like literally in January this year, fleets of a certain size can only buy zero emission vehicles. Well, how are we going to get the charging infrastructure online to do that? So I had another bill this year, 420, that's all about basically treating these high capacity distribution lines and speeding them up, basically removing about 2.5 years of process that they would have had to go through, and speeding them up and treating them like other smaller distribution lines. And that bill's on the governor's desk today. So we have to make sure the governor signs all these bills. That's 410 and 420 if you're tracking at home, and 619 from my colleague Steve Padilla on some of these larger transmission lines as well. So it's great to set the goals as you talked about, but we got to figure out at the end of the day, how are we actually going to get there from an infrastructure standpoint, and then focus on all the other areas of carbon emissions that I'm sure we'll talk about. We may talk about today, but we have bills in agriculture, we have bills in cement and building materials and hard to decarbonize sectors. And the great news is there's technology across the board in those areas, but we as policymakers, we have to set the policy conditions to let those entrepreneurs thrive, and that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. I don't know if it's a good idea, but I figured we should go ahead and talk about net metering and distributed solar right off the bat, because it was enormously controversial. And I just want to frame up the argument of folks who supported the kind of rollback of the value of the energy that's exported from rooftop solar. And I think the argument goes like this. We don't need that solar when it's being generated. We need it later in the day. We should structure a policy framework and an incentive that rewards that. And what do you think might be the best way? First of all, do you agree with that premise? And if you do, what is the best or perhaps a better way to structure that incentive than what came out of the California Public Utilities Commission? And feel free to jump in as you all choose.
Want me to start?
I think you'd better.
Okay, I don't know who came up with these arguments, but they are completely detached from reality. California needs 180 gigawatts more of renewable energy in the next 10 to 15 years. That's additional. We've only built 50. We need 180 gigawatts of renewable energy and energy storage capacity. And that works out to that 6 gigawatt number a year. We're behind schedule. We're behind pace. If anybody is geeks out, look at CalISO's energy supply and demand on a daily basis, any summer day, and you will see we are heavily dependent on natural gas still in the middle of the day at 12 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun is shining brightest. It is absolute false to say we don't need more solar energy. It is also true, and we need to be able to hold two concepts in our head at once, that we need more batteries. But guess what charges up the batteries? Solar. So we need more solar and we need more batteries. Making solar and batteries more expensive as a combined package for consumers is not a way to grow a market. California slashed the value of solar 80% and made it effective, essentially immediately. And we are now seeing an 80% drop in sales. It is a direct correlation. We said this would happen, and it happened, and we're reeling from it. Of course, we're trying to sell batteries. Battery attachment rate last year was maybe 12%, so 12% of consumers going solar added a battery. We are hoping those numbers will tick up, but to attach a battery to a market that is 80% shrunk is not progress. So we should have changed the way in which if we're going to slash the value of solar, which I think that is something we could debate, and I would argue solar is more valuable as we try to sprint to the finish line to stop climate change. It is more valuable today than it was yesterday. Okay, but if we lose that debate, fine. Let's step down the drop in incentives. You never do an abrupt change to a program like this. It is the worst thing. It's the most irresponsible public policy decision. So we should have a more gradual decline, and we should be heavily incentivizing batteries. California has a program called SGIP. If anybody's familiar with it, it's called the Self-Generation Incentive Program. It is predominantly for only low income, which is terrific. We should be heavily subsidizing low income, but you can't grow a market and leave the rest of the citizens and the businesses and everybody else behind. It's just not going to work. So we need to heavily incentivize batteries. We need to remove this draconian change in net metering and give it a step down approach. And we need to go beyond that. I mean, California should have dynamic rate structures. We should charge way less in the winter, way less in the winter and way more in the summer, and give consumers the tools that they need to manage that. Ironically, the Public Utilities Commission just basically gut and amended a proceeding that would have initiated that conversation, and they replaced it with a blunt tool called a fixed charge. And we've got PG&E now proposing $55 a month fixed charge on all residential customers. Every single month, it will disincentivize efficiency and conservation and solar energy, and it is the polar opposite of what we should be doing to drive innovation and clean energy and conservation.
Let me ask you, just by way of playing devil's advocate, if I may.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
Rooftop solar costs more per generated watt than utility scale solar. If we were to take that fact to the conclusion that we should choose to set up a set of policies that encourage the more rapid kind of growth of utility scale solar batteries and the like, I don't know what other policies would need to go along with it to make that growth possible. I don't know, Senator Becker, if you have thoughts about the bills you've passed this year and how they can or should be enacted by the agencies responsible for enacting them to ensure that we can actually accommodate the scale of central renewable generation that we need. And if you see more broadly, a better way for the state to kind of hold simultaneously the idea that central generation is critical and distributed generation is as well.
Yeah, I think, listen, I agree with everything. I think everything that Bernadette said. I mean, one of the central mantras of our team is build clean faster. That's kind of the general rubric of a lot of our legislation. And it's also, consistent with all of the above, right? We need more utility scale. That's why we're building a transmission. Again, the utility scale isn't valuable unless we actually build the transmission and make the transmission easier. But we need more distributed as well. And to me, those ideas are not in conflict, right? We absolutely need both. The reason that we did central procurement this year, and this was a 6-year effort to get central procurement done, is primarily for something like offshore wind, right? Something that is a massive undertaking. It's valuable. It's actually going to save ratepayers more in the long run because it's kind of perfectly inversely correlated with our onshore wind and with solar, right? So it's really aimed squarely at that 5 to 9 p.m. Time frame. And again, a lot of our legislation has been focused on 24/7 clean energy as well, because certainly still using natural gas during the day, but we're using a ton of it in that 5 to 9 p.m. Time slot, especially in the winter time now when people are coming home, plugging in their cars and such. And so from our standpoint is we really should be doing both. So I think it's a big mistake to disincentivize rooftop solar at this time and believe that we can both do that and do things like central procurement, make sure we actually build offshore wind, which is, as you know, is going to take 7 to 10 years anyway.
Can I just respond one little quick thing to the devil's advocate argument? When people use that argument that utility scale is cheaper than distributed, they are only talking about the electron at the end of the property line of a utility scale project. And I'm loath to get into this, celebrity battle between solar electrons, because I agree 100%. We need all of the above. We need 180 gigawatts of solar and renewables as soon as we can build it. Majority of that is going to be solar, right? So we should not be pitting one against the other, but facts matter. And the price of solar is at the property line. The expense to ratepayers of delivering those electrons into our cities, piping it into our homes and our businesses, is the largest expense right now on a utility bill. That does not get factored in when people talk about this, distributed is expensive. It is built into the environment. It is the cheapest, most efficient way for us to generate electricity. And nobody that is engaged in that slash and burn of the California's rooftop solar market is being intellectually honest about the value of distributed generation. That's saying nothing about line losses, local economic development, putting money back in the pockets of real consumers. Our largest growth in our market prior to this NEM 3 decision was in working class communities in California. We are putting money back in the pockets of California families when we equip them with solar panels. And it is just a falsehood. So I just have to say that. That said, we need all of the above. Offshore wind is tremendous if we can do it. It's going to be 10 gigawatts at best of that 180 gigawatt, okay? We can't get from here to there without utilizing rooftop solar. We just can't.
I appreciate that rebuttal.
Can you tell I've been fighting a little bit too much lately?
Yeah, well, you got a big battle ahead of you. I mean, you mentioned that there's a lot that didn't get put into the calculation of the value of rooftop solar in the NEM proceeding. I think among those values was the potential value of resiliency, the potential value of line losses. I don't know if we had the kind of social, local economic and economic development and economic kind of uplift effects calculated in that as well. I don't know if they
didn't
belong in a CPUC proceeding, but certainly, Arthur, I would imagine they are part of the calculus that GRID Alternatives and the people it serves are working on. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about how do we understand and enumerate or qualify the value that a growing rooftop solar or distributed solar industry and a growing workforce and a growing roster of economic development mean for communities? Where and in what ways is California serving those needs? In what ways is it falling short?
Well, I'll start by just saying that we can't do it like we have done it. So if you go by how it's been with the fossil fuel economy, there have been what I'll call sacrifice zones, right? Mm-hmm. Where the folks who have been most impacted are paying the most, right? And I mentioned the city of Richmond, right? That's a really great example. It's a local one. For those of you who know, it's had a history of environmental impact. It started as a shipyard in World War II. Actually, I think made the most ships of any location in the country. And now it's the site of a almost 3,000-acre Chevron refinery, right? The neighborhood that I mentioned is literally kind of cordoned off, right? There's a freeway that's cut off from the shoreline. It just fits all the stereotypes, right? So you start with that. And they can't be left behind. Like, it just makes no sense. So I agree with what Bernadette is saying. I think that, first of all, it's the quicker way to go, okay? And then the impacts economically, you cannot calculate, right? The money that people save, and these are folks who are trying to make ends meet. Some of them have health issues. Then they can't afford the electricity and the equipment. So there's a lot of stuff there that is kind of incalculable. One of the things, in addition to installing solar, we also have a workforce development program. So we literally provide training for the communities so that they can get into this whole clean energy revolution. And, and there's folks who, in some cases, are, coming back from the re-entry populations. So there's a little bit of a knock of that some of the jobs are lower paying, but it's a start. And from there, they can go into unions, they can become electricians. So it really is like there are very few places where you can go and get the experience you need to then get the job, right? So we kind of started off with this barnstorming model where folks could literally come and volunteer, get the experience, and then get a job. And it's evolved into a workforce development program. And it's changed a little bit because of COVID. We're kind of still ramping back up. But we're just trying to provide opportunities, right? We provide savings and access. And frankly, one of the biggest things is just the information. Like, some folks don't even know what's possible, right? And they get approached by all kind of, with all kind of offers. I was sharing with Bernadette. It's amazing how, so for the folks that we serve, that meet the qualifications through a program called DACSAS, which is a state incentive program. They have to live in a particular geographic area and make a particular income and own the home, which in the Bay Area is like finding a needle in the haystack. Right. But we have an amazing outreach team. We find them. But then when we find them and we tell them what we're offering at no cost to them, they're like, go away, you're kidding, you're lying, right? So it's amazing how challenging it is to give this away. So it's like information. And again, we're talking about access, information. Those who are in the know and have better resources get better information and can do things that others can't. So we're battling lots of layers to basically say, hey, this is possible. And then when we get happy clients, it's amazing. They're our best referrals because they're like literally pointing to the roof and say, no, it's true. You can actually have this. So there's solar and then there's EV charging. So we're trying to just get everybody aware and then give them access. So but it's a lot quicker to get these installations done. I mean, we're for all of it, but this is, we're builders, right? So we want to see things getting done, and the faster the better. And this has been working for us.
Yeah. I am really curious about the kind of what I guess I would describe as a chicken and egg problem with kind of expanding the capacity of the state to build at the rate that Bernadette, you've pointed out, needs to be done. And I guess it applies at both the kind of big utility scale and at the local distributed scale. And I guess the problem is, and you hear this a lot with people talking about trying to get a heat pump or install an EV charger. There aren't enough qualified, workers to do this work, and therefore you can't get it done in time. And perhaps because you can't get it done in time, a robust demand is not developing, and therefore the contractors and the electricians don't see the need to kind of staff up and invest in expanding their workforce. I don't know if I'm accurately describing this dynamic, but I'm really wondering if it is true, and if so, how do we break out of it? What do we do with that situation?
Yeah, well, listen, there's been elements of truth to this. I mean, any growing market, you're going to have tensions, frictions at the edges, and we've had some of that. But again, that's why this bill I passed this year, 410, we actually worked with the electrical workers, and because they said, hey, okay, we want to get more people into the process, but we need to know that the work's going to be there. So we said, okay, we got to do the workforce part of it. We have to do, again, the accountability for the utilities. At the end of the day, we have to hold them accountable for hitting timelines. And then third is, okay, let's do some targeted investments. Let's do this interim rate making focused specifically on this issue. So that's what we had to do. And I think that's why, and I actually underestimated it. I was like, I just did it because we had a big fucking problem here in my area. But now I've been on numerous Zooms with the charging associations, charging, various conferences already just in the last couple of weeks, and they want to take this national. I think it's for that reason, because you have to bring all those pieces together. I just want to say one thing on the issue of, listen, as I said, there's always going to be friction at the edges here, but what this should be, when I look around and see people I know who've been in this industry for already now decades, right? Like, this should be our golden age, right? Like, we are winning. We have won. I mean, we won the climate argument. We won the economic argument. And now we see the forces of now trying to take us backward. And you see the Republicans and Trump talking about, they're going out after EVs, and they're trying to belittle EVs, and they're trying to go against ESG, and they're like in the boardrooms. I mean, it's really crazy stuff. They're trying to, they know they've lost the economic argument. They know they've lost the climate argument. So now they're going to, it's just fear and disinformation and trying to stall the progress. And, and that has, that affects us here in California in various ways too. So this should be our golden age. We need to make sure that no one slows this progress, because if anything, as we know, we need to speed it up much, much more quickly.
Thanks. Bernadette, Arthur, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about how we spur a workforce kind of revolution here.
You want to go?
Sure. I mean, the quick answer is we've got no choice. We're running out of time. So, chicken or the eggs, figure it out. I feel like we've got goals to meet, and what do we need to do to meet that? So, we do workforce development. We're trying to scale our program. So we kind of started as a volunteer kind of organization, and now we're doing workforce development. We've got a program called IBT 200, which is Installation Basics 200, and it's a 5-week course where folks come in and they do some classroom work and some lab work, and then they're out in the field. So it's really meant to be practical, and we've got regions that are churning out cohorts of folks to do that. Now we're trying to take that model and do like a train the trainer model. So it's like, yeah, just like, what's it going to take? So this is my first nonprofit that I'm working for, actually. And it's been quite a learning curve in a lot of different ways. But one thing that resonates with me, and I'm actually surprised at how entrepreneurial we are as a nonprofit. We do lots of different things. I joke with people that I thought I worked hard as an entrepreneur. This is a whole nother level. It's literally like running 6 companies in one with all the various lines of work that we do. And each one has a particular client base and funding. It's really, thank goodness I love a challenge. But we are, not everything's gonna work. If you try 10 things, 3 of them are gonna work. How quickly can you get to those 3? That means you gotta just kind of iterate and try and try and try until you kind of get to what works. So, I hate to steal the logo, but it's like, just do it, right? Like, just let's so to your point, we just gotta, we're trying to some different programs, and we're talking to as many employers. What are the needs? Talking to the trainees. What are you trying to do? And then just iterate and do.
There's a couple of different ways to answer the question. I would say, from my vantage point, that the speed, the uptick of adoption of electrification technologies is not right now being slowed down by workforce constraints, but it will be in time to get to where we need. So we need to be able to, again, like walk and chew gum, we need to be able to drive the demand and drive the growth of the markets, and at the same time, remove barriers to entry in the workforce. California, I know I'm just kind of full of critiques right now, but it does feel like it's one after another. This is a really wonky thing, but there's a proposal right now pending before a licensing board called the California Contractor Licensing Board that would require solar and storage distributed to be only installed by electricians. To become electrician requires 5 years of training. That is a barrier for a lot of people. And it is an important thing. Our electricians are priceless. They're like the PhDs of the building trades, and we need every single one of them. But I guarantee you, we need every single one of them working with Senator Becker's interconnection work. We need them doing, EV charging. We need them doing all of the wiring of a home. And we really should not be pulling up the ladder for those who are trying to get in right now to the clean energy workforce by creating this incredibly high barrier. And at the same time, destroying solar companies that have built their whole life around their license, which is to specialize in solar and storage. So just one example of where California is just kind of heading in the wrong direction. If we care about workforce development and moving more and more people away from the fossil fuel industry toward clean energy, we should not be basically throwing up all of these roadblocks.
Can I say one thing, Jim? Yeah, on the equity side, equity has many forms, so we talked about it, and it also means the workforce, right? And making sure we're diversifying the workforce. We hold the trades accountable for diversifying the trades, but we also create opportunities for other people who traditionally weren't in those trades to get into this work, and that's really important. And I just want to say, like, the equity piece is not just because it's morally the right thing to do, but from a policy standpoint in California, it's imperative because, again, I know, some people look at prices, oh, it's easy in California. It's not, right? Because we are, as you in this room know, we're the 6th or whatever largest oil producing state in the country. So the #1 contributor to the state legislature is the Western States Petroleum Initiative, right, by far. And so it is difficult. And, I have colleagues who say, hey, I represent mostly Latino workers making $48,000 a year, and they don't think any of this stuff is for them. So unless they actually believe it's for them, it's going to make their lives better at the end of the day. Their representatives aren't going to vote for this stuff too. So the equity piece is not only morally the right thing to do, but politically, if we're not bringing everyone along, if we're not making lives better across the state, then we are going to lose.
Yeah, thanks for that. I wanted to step to interconnection for a second because I guess I should double check on the extent to which interconnection delays, interconnection challenges, and the underlying kind of grid build out that I may be a part of the challenge with getting interconnections done in a timely fashion might be a real gating issue for growing the workforce, as well as, getting all this stuff built that we need and interconnected that we need. And I guess, Senator Becker, I'm wondering, when you describe holding the utilities accountable, what does that look like? And how do you do that through the interim rate case, which sounds like is a way to allow them to add a couple cents per month to our utility bills to get the money to go do the work that your bill calls on them to do?
Right, but your question was about the first part was about how does the workforce piece fit into that?
Yeah, or
Yeah,
actually,
and
utility.
So that's why it's the whole
accountability.
package, because we tried this the first year, and Ken's my kind of climate guru here. We tried this first year with like just timelines and penalties, and we just got crushed, politically in every way. Sure, and it also was unrealistic, right? And so we came back. We said, okay, we need timelines and penalties for the utilities, but again, we have to make sure the workforce is part of it. And for the workforce to be there, they need to know the work's going to be there. So that's why we kind of got integrated to this whole picture. We said we have to have all those three things come together. And if we know that the work's going to be there, we're going to staff up the workforce. We have agreed, and then we have timelines and penalties for the utilities. So that's what the bill is. 410 is really that, bringing those three things together.
I guess I'm wondering too, how, in general, what you guys think of the kind of twin challenge of giving the utilities what they need to build the grid and interconnect stuff faster, while also holding them accountable for spending the money that we allow them to collect in a wise fashion. It's tricky because the rates are going up, and I know that the rates aren't going up for the reasons that we're talking about here today, but they are going up. And how do you see the best way for state policy to hold utilities to account and yet give them the tools they need to do what needs to be done?
I'll just start out with that, because that's kind of our, this is what we've been working on for the last few years. I mean, as we know, like our rates are really disconnected with actually moving energy around. The problem is we stuff lots of things into rates, right? We stuff in all the wildfire costs into rates. The CARE program, which is a $5 billion program, we put that into rates. So we put everything into rates. So we tried last year to create this climate and equity trust and say, hey, let's pull those. Let's take the CARE program. Let's take those wildfire costs. Let's take them out of rates, and let's create a climate and equity trust. And we had the surplus, and we couldn't get it done politically. But we need to do something like that. Say, hey, these are costs we want to take as a state as a whole. Great. Let's take those out of rates. Let's put those into the general fund, and let's focus the rates on things around energy. So I think longer term, we have to do something like that, because the high rates disincentivize the switch to electrification, which is what we all want, is what we need for our energy policy. So that's kind of what the big picture and what we're looking at. And then in the meantime, it's how do we hold the utilities accountable, both in general, how do we do a better job in the general rate case, which for PG will come up in 27. So we need general rate case reform. And then in the case, if we ever do targeted investments in this case, we put lots of guardrails, and you can look at what we did, lots of guardrails around it, and lots of accountability. So it's very focused on, say, for example, clearing this massive backlog and getting interconnection put up. So there's, short-term stuff, and then there's medium-term stuff, and then there's long-term stuff when it comes to rates, in my mind.
We put forward a bill last year, in addition to what Senator Becker did. It was authored by Senator Becker's colleague in the South Bay, Mark Berman, and I believe it's AB 643. But it would basically require that the Public Utilities Commission penalize with financial penalties the utilities for not meeting their interconnection Rule 21 timelines, and the money would come from shareholders, not from ratepayers. We think that's actually a really important additional tool to the work Senator Becker hopefully will put in place with the governor's signature. But we think there needs to be actually a little bit of a financial penalty for the utilities to just continue to blow past the appropriate timelines. Great that will have the staff to do the work. let's make sure that they do it by creating a little bit of a stick. And we think that bill has a lot of merit. It was turned into a 2-year bill, which if you're familiar with Sacramento lexicon, that means it was met with some stiff opposition and held in the mysterious Appropriations Committee. But we are really optimistic with growing awareness of interconnection problems, which is it's growing on the distribution side as well as the utility sales side that you hear a lot about, that we will be able to move that forward, because I think it makes a lot of common sense.
Yeah. I guess, Arthur, I don't know if you guys have any experience with this. I don't know if the kind of work that you guys are working on is encountering challenging interconnection, issues, and how, the communities that you serve are kind of dealing with them.
Not to the extent, nothing that's stopping us, right, from continuing our work. I mean, months at a time. So first of all, we've got a different client base. They're a little more patient than others, because they're getting it at no cost. So there's a little bit of like, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Some of our folks, it takes, with all the bureaucracy of the application process that we go through, can take up to 9 months or a year to get the installation done and the interconnection. So we factor that in and just manage expectations that way. So kind of built it into the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was also struck by the point you made about the philosophy of just get it done, just do it. I do wonder how you apply that to reforming and kind of renovating how utilities go about doing what they do. I don't know how you just get it done when anything you want to get done must go through a couple years of kind of quasi judicial review at the CPUC, and be applied to a kind of really, really strenuous test of how it might possibly backfire for every single kind of class of ratepayer and every single, circumstance one can imagine. And I don't know if utilities are necessarily the entities that should be looked to be responsible for innovation out there. But I might imagine that there are ways to incentivize California's utilities to innovate freely without running the risk of perhaps burdening their ratepayers with escalating costs due to the money they spend trying to do that. But I don't know if there are any good examples of where we're seeing innovation being made possible through policy or through the actions of the utilities themselves, or whether there are alternatively other ways that you think others outside the utilities could innovate, if only. I'm not sure.
Well, I'll just say, we're trying to remake our energy system while we have these monopoly legacy providers, right? And it's difficult. It's for all the reasons you just said. It's difficult. And, we know, for example, I know personally, utilities don't tend to run very good consumer-facing marketing programs. So I was a seed investor in O-Power back in my clean energy investing days. And O-Power was a radical idea. It was basically saying, hey, great, let's just turn the utility bill into a marketing document for energy efficiency. And the utilities, I think, kind of quickly realized, yeah, we're not really good at that. So they basically turned it over to O-Power and prove that they could just use behavioral psychology to reduce energy bills, 2 to 5%, which was significant. And I think when you talk about demand flexibility, for example, is another area where we need to make sure we're enabling third-party aggregators. And so I've spent a lot of time grilling the regulators on this topic, because I still feel like we're not doing enough to open up data sharing for the utilities to third-party aggregators. And we have those folks who have, with their own money and venture money, bought, say, million Nest thermostats, and then we allow utilities to basically compete against them using ratepayer dollars. That makes no sense to me, right? So I think that's another area where we need to do better. We're spending $1 billion. We're spending $1 billion on dirty legacy, once through cooling, heavily polluting plants, just because we might need them for like 15 hours a year. And you think about the storage we could have built with that, the solar we could have built with that. And you think about what we can do with better demand flexibility. I was on a panel with Jigar Shaw this morning. He's very big on virtual power plants, and that's something that can be incented through the IRA. Maybe some of you are working on that. We have some big some big projects here in California. So again, I think that's another area, an example of where we really have to let the innovators innovate and not let utilities be a bottleneck to innovation.
Yeah, I was going to actually mention the virtual power plants and bring up the community choice aggregates, right? Like, again, I tend to be glass half full, but I'm amazed they exist, right?
It took a long time.
Yeah, but they're out there, and actually, MC is doing a virtual power plant in Richmond. So I bring up Richmond a lot. We work other places, but they do so many great things there that I have to use them as a model. But it's an exciting pilot, right? That's tapping into all the solar that we've installed, along with storage and the smart meters and heat power pumps, and if that goes well, it's still at the early stages. But I think those are the kind of projects that just force, like I'd like to think that those kind of projects will just pull the utilities along. Right, like they can't ignore what's going on anymore, and they have to respond. And I think because the virtual power plant is actually going to be rewarding the participants, right? So they're going to get discounts off their bill for that. That kind of word gets around, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I want that too. And then the dots get connected, and I think things will move. So that's my, I guess, hope.
Yeah.
I want to go back to that fact I shared earlier, that the largest battery in the world is in California, hanging on garage walls. It's a gigawatt worth of energy storage capacity in a distributed fashion. To put that in context, when California had its blackouts a couple Augusts ago, the delta in our needs was around 250 megawatts. There's one power plant that didn't go online when it was supposed to. So if you put that in the context, even a battery that is only supposed to run for a couple of hours, we could have filled the gap in theory, right? Those batteries weren't all, we haven't enabled the virtual power plant concept, but the point is we are every day, we have this potential to build these alternative versions of power plants and fill the gaps in very short increments, where California builds this gigantic grid to fill our needs for a couple hours out of the year. There's a better way to do it, right? And if we do it inverse the model, so we do it primarily loading order first, efficiency and conservation, reduce what we need. I'm seeing a very disturbing pattern happening right now in California, where we're starting to pit electrification against efficiency. That is a really bad idea, and we've got to fight against that. So we got to maintain that, and then we should do distributed resources next, and then utility scale to fill in the big gaps from there. If we do that and we enable the combination, the networking of all of these miniature power plants, we can, no problem, meet our clean energy goals and keep the lights on. I don't mean to say no problem like it's going to be easy, but we can do it. We are an amazing state. And to just riff off of what the Senator was saying earlier, this should be our golden era, and it isn't right now. We're like running a marathon, and we're at mile 12. And we just threw up like a bunch of barriers in our pathway and put a pebble in our shoe, and it's just, we just got to clear that out and get ourselves back on path with good leadership, and we can get there. And the utilities, we just need a regulator that'll stand up to the monopoly. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, this is what government should do. This is like the highest form of government. If we're going to give a sanctioned market to a utility, we have to regulate them well. So that's the most innovation I think we need, is a stronger Public Utilities Commission to rein in the utilities and get them on the right track. And they'll do fine just with, pulls and wires, and we can let the innovation happen around them.
Thanks, y'all. We have just a few minutes left, but I should probably ask, what have I not asked y'all so far that you wanted to talk about here? Am I missing anything important? And are there any kind of last and final points you'd like to make, or any emphasis you'd like to put on any particular problem that you're working on?
So, at the risk of triggering a conversation here,
I may cut you off, but
that's fine. So we've talked a lot about. So I'm excited about community solar, right? Yeah. And I think that in contrast, well, I'll just mention Contra Costa County in particular, because we have guess 3 refineries out of the 9 in the state, and it's had a lot of impact. And there's some that are going to be supposedly closing down, withdrawing. Like there's an opportunity to repurpose that property, given how hard it is to find land in the Bay Area. And there's a whole concept of brownfields to bright fields, right? And it's going to take a lot of connecting dots from the various organizations, between the community organizations and the refineries and like there's a lot of, but that's something that is worth doing, and so that we can continue to be the power hub, but in a different way. So that's something that yeah.
You're going to trigger a fist pump right here. That is
Okay.
beautiful. I love that vision. That is awesome vision. That is community solar. We are building energy in our communities and even better repurposing what has been a burden on those communities. Even if it's provided resources, right? It's been a burden, and that's gorgeous. I would say the one thing we haven't talked about is the good old net metering topic, but there's a policy decision pending right now at the Public Utilities Commission with a vote expected Thursday, October 12th, that will determine the fate of what's called multi-meter properties. So apartment buildings, schools, farms, strip mall type developments, anything with multiple meters, either multiple connection points to the grid or multiple tenants on one property. The Public Utilities Commission wants to apply the draconian changes to net metering and then some. They want to basically declare every electron that solar system generates on that apartment building and export, and then force people to buy it back from PG&E at retail rates. So it's just a ridiculous proposal. We're fighting really hard. Oakland Unified just did a press conference yesterday to stand up and say, hey, this is going to really squash all of the green investment dollars we've collected from the community and we want to do to help green up Oakland. And we're hoping that gives us a big shot in the arm. But if you want to tune in to the Public Utilities Commission vote on October 12th, they start at 11 a.m. and you can be virtual and you can make a public comment and help us make sure that the vote goes the right way.
Also, a couple of things. One, just a shout out to the CCAs who are showing we can innovate, and SMUD with their aggressive targets showing what is possible. I'll say, big picture, we need a movement that builds. So our friends in the environmental community, we need to kind of get that message out. We need to protect our environment here in California, but we also need to make sure that we get stuff done and we do this build out. We didn't talk about the IRA and implications but that is really going to make everything cheaper. But we need to make sure that California is in a good position for that. I'll just say that, if you're unhappy if you're happy, great. Then you have to be wary for the reason I'll mention. If you're unhappy, then you got to get organized, because there's a lot of seats open in the legislature. We're losing Nancy Skinner right here. Losing Nancy Skinner, that's like that's losing Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson. I mean, that's like, you lose Nancy Skinner. That's a big effing deal. And, you're all going to figure out, who replaces her. We're losing. There's an open state Senate seat. Steve Glazer said he's not going to run again. That means there's going to be assembly seats just in this area alone, let alone in the state. There's just a massive turnover. And there was one last year, and there's one this time in 24. And then we're not going to have that. People are going to be pretty locked in for a while. So I will tell you, from being in the legislature, there's not enough, by far. The clean energy community does not show up in a big enough way in elections or in policy in Sacramento, and that's a big problem, and we need to fix it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. As always, much more to talk about than we have time to talk about it, but it's been a great discussion, and I'd like to thank and join the audience in thanking Arthur Bart-Williams, Bernadette Del Chiaro, and Senator Josh Becker. Thanks very much.
Thanks, John.
And there's more food outside.
We all move to the beat of our playlists a little differently. And with millions of songs to discover on Spotify Premium, it's good to know you can listen without hearing ads. Just queue up your songs and get in your zone. Upgrade to Premium and listen your way. Tap the banner to learn more.
Get in my car and I will drive you into the sunset. Are you ready? Let's go.
You'll be seeing us around soon. And when you do, I bet you'll call us BMO. Don't worry, it's more common than you think, but we actually pronounce it BMO. As in, with BMO, you can earn a cash reward every month you save. Or, did you know BMO's been helping customers for over 200 years? So when you do see us, pop in and say hi. Not to BMO, to BMO. And yes, bank is still pronounced bank. Learn more about us at BMO.com. Conditions apply. Accounts are subject to approval and are provided in the United States by BMO Bank N.A. member FDIC.
Hey, the infamous, famous Eric Westhoff. You're not going to want to miss this. Come back in, wrap up your conversations. Thank you.
I was talking to my brother about the things that give us trouble. All you know, we both get awful blue. Thing I saw we had in common was this kind of faithless longing, had us wandering round, wondering what we're here to do. Oh, trying to go this thing alone is like trying to eat a mountain. It's like trying to swallow the sea. It's like waking in the morning, not believing you belong here. You got nothing to give or to receive. Hey, bring back my faith. It is the root and the structure to this tree of life upon which we all thrive. I see spirit as to the land as is the left to the right hand of the same body, different sides. Why would we make it up? Would we make it up? That we don't belong here when we can only totally inseparably be. I want to open my eyes and give thanks to the dawning, singing, bring it on. Bring it on. I believe I am home. I'm giving over to my place in the natural order of things. I'm giving over to my place in the natural order of things.
You make some new friends? Did it feel comfortable? Like you could go up to any person and be like, "Hey, you like Canary? Yeah, I like Canary. Cool. Let's be friends." Did that?
was like,
Okay, you could try that next time. I think people are receptive. Hey, people, come on in. We're having a great time in here. Everybody's sitting. They're resting their legs after standing. we're vamping a little bit. You could, play along with me. Do we want to do what if we got all of you to kind of like make some noise and like clap a little bit and make it sound like you're excited for the next panel? Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. That's like we flash up the applause light, and now everyone's coming in because they want to see what's happening. It's really exciting in here, and it will be exciting because we've got a very good panel coming up. It's about investing in clean technology. This is obviously a high-tech town. I actually got to ride in my first driverless car this weekend. Have y'all done that? You could hop in a taxi that there's no human driver, and you could just call it, and you get in, and there's nobody in the driver's seat. You drive, and I thought it would be terrifying because no one's driving it. But actually, what was terrifying was the AI started pitching me story ideas. Like they're like, "Oh, you're a journalist. You write about solar. You should write more about nuclear. Humans are so irrational about nuclear energy. Why don't you write about that?" I was like, just keep driving, okay? Don't take my job. It's not what you're here for. But yeah, it's a good time. It's a good time. I think we've got almost everybody. Yeah. So why don't we move it along? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Julian, I'm really looking forward to editing those articles. I want to see them on my desk tomorrow. And maybe our next hire we can discuss, your driverless car AI. All right, I think we've got people coming in. Great. So we have a great panel, really interesting discussion coming up. Our Canary Media's editorial director, Eric Wessoff, is going to lead a discussion about VC funding in the era of IRA. But first, Kristen Kirsch is here from Nextracker, and she's going to say a few words.
Let's hear it for Kristen.
I know. Well, we're offering them something exciting so they can come in. Yeah.
All right. Okay, how's everyone doing? Are you fired up in a non-carbon way? Yeah? Well, a little bird once said, "Energy nerds, energy curious." That's what Canary Media is all about. And I have a hunch that all of you that are along that spectrum, somewhere along that audience spectrum, right? So I, for one, am both. And that's why my company, Nextracker, is funding an event like this. We want to get people together. We want to get people, the community, talking. And what Canary Media does as a nonprofit, this light is really bright. I'm going to come over this area. What Canary Media does is supporting and creating, delivering every day, unbiased, independent climate change journalism. It's a nonprofit, and we need to support them. So that's one of the messages I wanted to get across today. A little bit about Nextracker. We're a global energy solutions company focused on moving that needle on decarbonization. We create solar tracker and software solutions for utility scale as well as distributed generation applications. But why are we supporting today? We believe in the power of nonprofits. We believe that nonprofits are a vital part of the ecosystem in our community. We need to be supporting CALSA, Bernadette, wherever you might be. We need to be supporting Vote Solar, local GRID Alternatives, Canary Media, and so many more. If you haven't done anything like GRID Alternatives volunteering, for example, just to give you an example, my company on occasion will do community projects with Vote Solar, with GRID Alternatives. We'll get up on roofs and do team building activities. If your company is interested in doing something like that, that's one way that you can get involved. But alas, I'm going to give it over to the panelists and to Eric. Thanks for having us, and we're thrilled to sponsor, and enjoy the panel. I should also mention that we're hiring, so visit nextracker.com.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Come on. Thank you. Thank you for that. So thanks to our sponsors, firstly, to Nextracker, to SPAN, MCE, Modern Energy, Sense, and Terabase. They're all aspirants or major players in these industries. And again, thank you. We are a nonprofit, and you can donate to Canary Media by going to our donate button on our website. You can also leave us some money in your will.
Cheery thought.
Grim. Yikes.
It's a viable 501c3 method of fundraising. I'd also, that the first panel was great. I wanted to serve as Jeff St. John's anger translator, but fortunately we had Bernadette on the panel. And I'm so glad that she's on our side fighting for this industry. So it's just, and we're going to call a slight audible on this because, well, this was originally about venture capital investing in the era of the IRA. We're fortunate enough to have Elaine Shea from the DOE, and the DOE and her role at the DOE is part of this chain of innovation, funding, and commercialization. And I think commercialization is what we're going to talk about here to a great extent. And Elaine's presence here was iffy because she works for the US government, and the US government was, whether it would be operating, was iffy, but we can thank the former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, for that. So thank you, Kevin McCarthy.
Parting gift.
All right, so we're talking about the IRA, and I wanted to put it in perspective. It's quotidian to us. We use the word every day. We cover it every day, but it's terribly named. But things like the New Deal, that's a good name. That was $324 billion of adjusted to today. The LBJ's Great Society, another good name, cost $520 billion. And Barack Obama's ARRA, not a good name, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, was almost $1 billion. The IRA, along with the bipartisan humana investment law, is a total of we need a naming department within the DOE. That's $3.5 trillion. So the IRA, thank you very much, thank you. It dwarfs the New Deal, it dwarfs LBJ's Great Society, and a colleague said, we have to start making as much noise about what we're doing here as the oil and gas companies make about what they're doing. So did that make sense? Go ahead.
Can I just add one factoid to what you just said? So it does, 3.5 trillion is a huge accomplishment, and we're so grateful for it. But it is dwarfed by the $7 trillion in 2022 that the oil and gas industry has in subsidies. So we still have a long ways to go.
The woman.
Which one? One who was speaking. The lady in red,
woman,
I think.
that woman over there.
Yeah. I don't know how to.
They all that one over there. They all have all of these women have
Binders.
silent letters in their name. That's what they have in common. All right. We're going for a lighter touch in the second panel. All right, while this is happening,
I'll introduce our panelists with a little bit about their bio. Nancy Pfund is a leading and pioneer player in impact investing. I refuse to rattle off all of her qualifications because they make me regret my misspent life. But she's on the boards or sponsors the boards of the Farmers Business Network. That's Amal Deshpande, right?
Yeah, that was one of the founders. Yeah.
Andela, the Muse, Zola Electric, who's doing
Clean energy storage and solar in the developing world.
Indeed. More importantly, Bellwether Coffee, she's an investor in. She's also an investor in a company called Rain, another company called Wind. And I'm sure there's another in that.
Air.
Yeah, she's investing in air. I'm sorry, this is just the first paragraph of her bio. I'll stop there. She's also the chapter chair of the Silicon Valley Women Corporate Directors Foundation, amongst many, many, many other accolades. And she's been doing this for a while, and she's an OG in the investment world. Mona, do the silent last name for me.
ElNaggar would
That's
be
right.
with the sign out, but otherwise ElNaggar is fine.
Okay, well, it's not really silent. She's a partner at Valo Ventures, which is a mission-driven venture capital firm. Did I mention that you're the managing director of DBL Ventures? I didn't mention that. And Valo invests in climate change, the circular economy, and empowered people. On her bio, she says she's the proud, nerdy graduate of the university where fun goes to die. What university?
University of Chicago.
And her firm is invested in Boston Materials, Modern Hydrogen, Roadrunner Recycling, and a number of other companies. And on the end over there is Elaine Shea. She's a senior advisor to the Undersecretary for Infrastructure. That's Mr. David Crane. That's a Senate-approved position. And before that, she was the CMO at Third Derivative, which is a program under Rocky Mountain Institute. And Canary Media is an independent affiliate of Rocky Mountain Institute, in full disclosure. And she also worked at Generate Capital before that, and Green Biz Group, and before that, DNV. And she's going to be able to tell us about the enormous amounts of money that the DOE is deploying in order to leverage private funds. She mentioned to me that we have to deploy $10 trillion by 2050 in order to do decarbonizate, to
reach
net zero,
right. So
to
the
reach net
president,
zero.
yes. So the president's goals are to be carbon-free electricity by 2035 and net zero economy by 2050. In order to achieve the net zero economy by 2050 goal, you need roughly $10 trillion by 2050 in terms of clean energy capital formation. So that's private sector investment, which is roughly over $300 billion per year of private sector investment that we need. So we have a lot to do.
And Elaine will be speaking not as a private citizen today, but as a representative of the DOE. And so there are things we can't ask her as a journalist. Like, what's your favorite technology? She can't really say that, right? You can't really say that, right?
I love them all.
Okay, there you can see. So you can't really ask her that question. All right. So most of us have lived through a renewable energy bubble over the last 10 years, and we've watched huge amounts of venture capital go in, and some successes, but not entirely successful. Here we're in a much better funded, much more incentivized, much more societally aligned situation. You lived through 2008 to 2012, and you saw that. How is this different? Yeah, that's the question. Why is this not? Are we going to see a lot of better places, or and the many interesting companies that appeared in that previous bubble? I imagine we will. But how is this different?
Well, it's really different, and I just want to say thank you to Eric and the Canary Media team for bringing us together tonight. And Eric is the OG of climate journalism. I mean, he's been at this.
Thank you. Stop by and ask one of the editors at Canary if that's really true. Okay.
Well, I think from one OG to another, I've worked with you for long and will stand by that statement. I'm also was really fortunate to invest in Nextracker many years ago, and just so grateful for your leadership and what Nextracker gets and what a few version 1.0 solar companies got and wind was that policy matters, that advocacy matters, that you need to develop a movement, not just a company. And that really set apart the winners from the losers. There were so many great technologies for thin film, solar, and on, and they just died. It's not just a technology game. This is not like investing in SaaS or a traditional tech profile. You have to weave your technology into a broader framework that really matters, and that means engaging across policy, technology, investment, and advocacy. And really, that is what's different this time. Is I think people get that they've seen what worked and what didn't. Obviously, the existence of the IRA is an exclamation point to how policy matters. I do think that there is a risk of, we still have the risks of NIMBYism, of the politicization of this sector, which brought us a lot of headaches back in that 2010 to 12 timeframe. But I think there's a savvier group here. We have more funds. We have the best and the brightest really coming into this field in numbers, and of course in this industry, scale matters because that's how you drive down the cost. So we've seen that with solar, we've seen it with wind, we're seeing it with batteries, and so that really is helped by the advent of policy money and also all of the firms that are being started. So I think it's not a recipe for complete success because there are always going to be failures, but we're in so much better shape than we were 15 years ago.
Great.
Yeah. One other thing that I would add is that what's perhaps different than then is I think there's more money available for companies at later stages than there used to be before. That sort of growth sector for particularly climate investing wasn't as established in sort of climate tech 1.0. And so companies were sort of hitting that point of trying to scale or, what have you, and not yet being ready for the sort of really big check writers. And that, there's a lot, 80% of the money that was raised for climate over the past few years has gone into growth investing, private equity, the kind of later stage. And that's really quite helpful as well.
Okay.
I'm going to add too. That's okay with you.
Of course.
So in 2011, we all may recall the Sunshot Initiative. So, that from the Department of Energy standpoint, we created the Sunshot Initiative in order to increase the use of solar PV goods and services by decreasing its cost.
Which was to get it to $1 per watt, right?
That's right. That's right. And so what happened was then we became much more competitive from a solar energy market and supply chain standpoint. It also enhanced our R&D opportunities as related to the research we were doing related to solar energy alternatives as well. So, what we're trying to do at the DOE now is to build upon those learnings, right? There's a lot that happened in that era that we certainly found successful. And so, there are obviously learnings that we don't want to make mistakes around as well. But at the same time, there are these new clean energy driven markets that we can learn from, that we can build upon in terms of the learnings from the past, and really drive and maximize more renewables onto the grid and strengthen our supply chains, et cetera.
So the DOE is not the same DOE of 2010 as well, right? It's not grandpa scientist, PhD, Ernest
right.
Moniz and Stephen Chu. It's commercializing. Is this going live on the internet? It's staffed with a really different cohort of folks. So Elaine, tell us about the new DOE.
Yeah, that's right. So in late 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed, also known as the IIJA, BIL. We call it Bill and IRA, so Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Inflation Reduction Act. But with the standing up of these unprecedented laws, there was a inherent acknowledgement by Congress to get more commercialization expertise into DOE. So DOE has traditionally had these world-class laboratories, incredible technical expertise, science and innovation, but there really wasn't a lot of private sector expertise or understanding of how markets actually worked to really advance those clean energy technologies to get to scale, right? So with the restructuring through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Office of the Undersecretary for Infrastructure was set up. And that is essentially the arm of the Department of Energy that is focused on commercialization. So demonstrations and deployment, really getting these things out the door and driving more green commodities. We need to do it very quickly. And so they brought in a lot of leaders from the private sector, including Jigar Shah, who's the director of our loan programs office. That is one of the program offices under the Office of Infrastructure. And there are many more new ones. So the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, the Grid Deployment Office, the Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains Office, and even some for communities, state and community energy programs, Indian Energy, all those kinds of really great program offices that are deploying Bill and IRA funding, as well as a lot of other resources as related to commercialization. And David Crane, who is the former CEO of NRG, is our first Undersecretary for Infrastructure. So I'm in that office. And so we're really excited that we have so much market expertise now at the DOE.
All right. Just let me follow up a little bit. It's about commercialization. It's not as much about labs. It's about deploying and commercialization.
It's about both, but yeah.
And to that effort, the DOE with the LPO and your group in infrastructure has published a number of reports that you call commercial liftoff reports. And you're not a sponsor, but I'm going to say something nice here, okay? In other words, this is purely altruistic. Is this live streamed? Anyway, they've authored half a dozen great reports on getting technologies like advanced nuclear, carbon management, hydrogen, VPPs. There's some
industrial decarbonization, advanced nuclear. Yeah.
And I would recommend that you take a look at them because they're sober analysis of how to get these things commercialized, how to get from first of a kind to many of a kind. What do you need from a regulatory standpoint, from a workforce standpoint? And I think this is a new era in the way the DOE works.
That's right. We spoke to hundreds and hundreds of private sector stakeholders that represent buyers, developers, investors, to really understand what are the commercial adoption pathways for all of these critical sectors that need market liftoff in order to get to net zero by 2050. And so we publish these reports. They're living documents. You could go to liftoff.energy.gov. They're free downloads. Check it out. And they are critical signposts for where there should be investments, because that's the pathway that we're seeing to lifting off all of these clean energy demonstrations and obviously getting them to scale. And also de-risking the markets, frankly, in order to get that bankable offtake.
I think that reports, and we write reports all the time, and it's an important part of what moves this field forward is to sort of educate people away from the traditional oil and gas narrative. But in terms of starting the innovation process, it's really about the team. The report is helpful, but it doesn't really predict what will be successful. And so I think one of the things that's so important in gatherings like this and in the investment process is to make sure that we are finding the people that have the talent to go, up against the fossil industry or the petrochemical, the pesticide industry, whatever, this reinvent steel, reinvent mining. Those are really taking on odds that are crushing, I mean, in terms of the significance. So yes, the reports are super helpful, but it doesn't really predict what's successful.
So well, let's talk about teams and people a little bit. You invested in Nextracker, and Dan Shugar is the CEO, and he's a bit of a force of nature in this industry. He has had a golden touch with some of his investments, which you've been involved in before, the Powerlight, I think. So we're looking for more Dan Shugars and more Rafi Garabedians, who is a CEO at Electric Hydrogen. Folks who have...
Well, I would argue that electric hydrogen has not proven itself.
Indeed. Okay, let's go back to Dan.
Well, there's Elon Musk, there's the Rive brothers, there's Lynn Jurek. I mean, there's like a whole group of leaders that got us to where we are
So
today.
as a venture capital firm, you have certain things you can do. You can invest in a company and you can help staff that company. That's one of the roles that a VC can provide, is providing a network of personnel that you might be able to recruit from. How hard is that these days, finding people from outside? I would imagine it's gotten easier, but how hard is it bringing in people into clean tech? What do they need? Do you need domain experience, or you just need someone who can bend gravity?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, you need that, that leader that has the ability to inspire and is mission oriented, is a workaholic, is really going to is going to take it for the team and then some, and has the smarts around the technology, around the policy, around the finance, is able to scale. I mean, it has to be a very, very talented, inspirational leader, and then you build around that. And the good news, as you point out, is that people are coming into this field from the tech sector, from life sciences, from finance, because they want to make a difference. So we have such a powerful array of talent. It's just that there is still, as I pointed out, there's a heavily subsidized incumbent industry, and it's not just oil and gas, it's all of the industries from the 20th century that have a lot of power, and it's not, it isn't just reading a report to confound that power.
The other thing I would add to your list, which I completely agree with what you said, is that I think what we've seen a lot is some very smart, former Google engineers who can write an amazing piece of software, but they're, then trying to completely change the way utilities work. But not one member of the team has ever worked in a utility, understands what that's about, has ever sold to utility, et cetera. And, making sure that we're marrying those, that kind of ability to write a piece of software code, but then also, real true understanding of what the auto industry needs, or whatever it is. You said these are all like huge industries that they're trying to change, but kind of coming in it from the outside and saying, I'm smarter than you. I'm going to tell you how to do your business that you've been doing for eons. It doesn't always land well.
Mm-hmm. Here's how you can work with utilities, right? From a neophyte is going to be a disaster for sure. Elaine, we talked a little bit about demand side support, and riff on that a little bit. Tell me about how the DOE is.
We'll do a little.
So,
Wow. Demand side blues.
That's right.
So, I was talking about de-risking markets, right? So, like for example, let's give an example. So, clean hydrogen. We recently came out with, a competitive grant for hydrogen hubs. We have not yet announced the selection of those, and I'm not going to talk about that. But one of the things that's really important, what we've heard from investors, obviously, is that there's not bankable offtake. Obviously, there's not a mature enough market to be able to really, get some traction. We really need it to lift off quickly, right? We need these hydrogen hubs to become replicable. And so we really need to drive more demand side support. And so we took of the 10 billion that was allocated for hydrogen hubs, we took up to $1 billion to issue an RFP related to getting demand side support from, partnering with a nonprofit entity to be able to create the kind of contract for differences, like the kinds of structural and that kind of support in order to drive the right demand side support mechanisms. And you've seen this globally, with hydrogen, there are clean hydrogen auctions in Europe and, in Australia, there's also demand side support things. So we're learning from a lot of other countries in terms of what is actually effective related to demand side support. But the whole point is that this is a larger idea of how do you drive demand side support? How do you get more projects invested, right? By de-risking a lot of the barriers as related to these markets that just are really early across other areas like clean cement, clean steel, sustainable aviation fuel, carbon dioxide removal, chemicals. There's so many critical areas that need more bankable offtake, need more revenue certainty. And so the government is trying to do what we can to create mechanisms to be able to stand these up faster. So that's why we're really looking at that. Right now, we have more money than projects. So we really need more of that private sector project sponsorship.
Another example of demand side support from the DOE, I'm going to go down a nuclear thread for just a second, but many of the advanced reactors that are being aspired to and developed in the United States require a type of fuel that the United States doesn't make. We import it from Russia. And there's no order book. Nobody's stepping up to provide this fuel because there's not 5 customers for it. The DOE is actually becoming a customer for HALEU, highly enriched, high assay, low enriched uranium. And is actually becoming a customer for it to create a market for it, and so that nobody has to take that risk.
That's right. So we have a transmission facilitation program that's similar, where we're like the anchor customer that will, have that long-term investment and then sell the short-term, right?
I
so
think this is a
for
big
more
difference
transmission,
in the
right?
DOE of 10 years ago. That's not the role that the DOE was looking to play 10 years ago.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I mean, the ability to drive down the cost of solar by 90% in 10 years is why we're able to fight climate change. Is one of the big reasons why, and why renewable energy is more prevalent than new renewable energy.
Why solar is the leading source of new generation.
Yeah, and that had to do with things like the investment tax credit. It had to do with solar rebates at state level, the million solar roofs, net metering, which I'm sure Bernadette talked about. And those were very hard fought battles. I predict that the cost decline in these newer technologies will not be as impressive. That 10 years from now, we will not see
electrolyzers at a tenth of the cost.
Or nuclear be cost competitive. I mean, it took a huge effort, and it took the ability to scale and to reinvest in manufacturing and the public markets accessing those. You don't have public markets now that will will take a company public that doesn't have earnings. I mean, and a lot of these companies did not have earnings when they went public. So the system's very different than it was, and we need to fix that. But as much as we want these new technologies to thrive, we don't want to take attention away from what we know works as well.
That's true. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I love the pragmatic approach, and frankly, I'm so honored to be on the stage here with you, especially Nancy. And I want to learn from what you know, from what you've lived. And I also want to acknowledge the fact that the DOE is trying to be very holistic in the way that we are trying to get this market liftoff for over 20 sectors in order to get into net zero, right? And in this particular case, we're de-risking things related to things that I think Wall Street wants to hear, which is, getting community buy-in, strengthening supply chains, workforce development, permitting, offtake de-risking. There's a lot of stuff that we're doing all embedded into everything we're doing. Even the way that we're evaluating funding opportunities has a huge commercial lens on that too. And yes, reports can only do so much, but it's being informed by people who actually know what the price points for certain technologies are in the market, not what the lab is telling us, right? So it's not as theoretical as a typical report typically would be. And so we're making a lot of effort to try to change the paradigm.
And I would say I'm probably in the middle. I think that on the one hand, solar does work, and we need to lean into that more. We need to find ways to drive it faster, deeper, be more ubiquitous. It's something that works. But I think that we also need to be very open-minded about what else could be out there that could be as much of a needle mover as solar. And so I love the prediction. I love that you put yourself out there like that. I don't know that I'd be ready to say that will always be the case. And I'm really excited about some of the things that the DOE is doing. Another acronym, I always call it the OECD, but I think it's the OCED.
OCED, yeah.
The Office
of Clean Energy Demonstrations.
Thank you. Things like that, because it's, we have to be thinking with these new technologies about government and private capital working together, because it won't be the public markets that fish us out of this right now. We have to think about all the different ways that we can de-risk things. And first of a kind technology is something that most private capital is not ready to take that risk.
Right.
But you get that up and running, and your former employer, Generate Capital, is in there with the lots of money to finance the product. There's a lot of people who are going to step in when you're on nth of a kind. And the nth facility as opposed to a first of a kind.
Well, I would just remind people, at least our first fund was 2004. So we've been doing this for almost 20 years. And we've looked at gazillions of hydrogen deals. I mean, this is not a new thing. I mean, we have a tall stack of hydrogen deals. We didn't do any. We decided to go for batteries in electric vehicles. So we invested in Tesla. Would I be here on the stage tonight had I invested in all those hydrogen deals?
No.
So, I mean, there are winners there. I mean, not everything is going to make sense and pan out. I mean, we had our governor, Schwarzenegger, who did huge amounts for climate. He was touting the hydrogen highway. Remember?
I remember. There was a Hummer. It was involved the Hummer.
That's right.
Exactly. I mean, so these are some of these, and nuclear, of course, has been around since the middle of the last century. Yep. So there are certainly advances that are interesting and that we should be funding. But by the same token, oil and gas have had a monopoly for over 100 years, and because there are advantages to scale in energy.
So with the benefit of hindsight, you can say solar has a bit of a Moore's law. There is a semiconductor aspect, and we've ridden that semiconductor aspect to the cost we're at now. Same thing with lithium-ion batteries. To an extent, there is a bit of a Moore's law. Is that the razor that you say that hydrogen electrolyzers and fuel cells don't have that
Well, I,
0.1x path of getting to cost?
well, there will definitely be improvements, and we will see green hydrogen. Most hydrogen is not green today, so we need to be careful about the prospects for it. But certainly, electrolyzers that come down in cost and increase in efficiency will help with the carbon removal, because that's a key technology in that. But you need other benefits. I mean, you need to be able to create raw materials that decarbonize the production of fertilizer or used in mining. And those are the kinds of carbon removal technologies that have more of a chance, because it's not just storing carbon, it's the byproducts that they create are resulting in carbon negative raw materials for manufacturing. I think that's a really good area to invest in.
Okay. Mona, you've heard some no's. So if you're a hydrogen entrepreneur, this may not be your target audience right here. Mona, what are your red flags when you're looking at your deal flow and there's deals coming in? What do you put kind of quickly in the no pile? It may not be something that doesn't work, just something that you don't want to invest in.
Right. So it may be that University of Chicago background, the intellectually curious in me, that I would say that I remain curious about many things. But that while we remain, for example, nuclear curious, I would say that it is notably absent from our portfolio. And I do worry that nuclear is, for example, one of those technologies where government needs to move the needle more, because it just isn't on a time scale that fits a 10-year investment fund, in venture capital. And there are safety reasons why the regulatory body is so slow moving. But that just is what it is. Yeah. And so I think, for a while, that's going to just be a hard one for us to look at. I would say another area within climate where we have been curious but have not invested is in the area of agriculture. And, agriculture is so important. There's so much, huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of the way that we produce the food that we all enjoy. But, farmers have 1, maybe 2 crops a year. They operate in an industry that has very thin margins, lots of players, lots of levels to it that each has very thin margins. It's a very risk-averse group that aren't going to change, how they do business anytime soon or very, very quickly.
Well, I think there's actually progress in ag, and there's also a generational transfer. I mean, the farms are being passed on to a generation that's grown up understanding climate change and
technology a little bit more.
Yeah, and they have their laptops out in the field. So the ability, and Argonne Labs has said that we can decarbonize ag over the next 15 years by 70%, which is pretty much the same as we're doing in transportation. Yeah. And it has to do with monetizing practices that produce less carbon, cover crops, biopesticides, tillage. You can quantify, and the company you mentioned, FBN, does this with ADM and the USDA, quantify how much you're reducing the carbon load of your crop and then get paid for that. ADM wants to be green and will pay you more to buy corn that was produce less carbon. You can get electric vehicles on the farm. There's now precision spraying of pesticides, so that you use 80% less. I mean, it's really an existential threat for the pesticide industry when these new spraying arms.
Sure, we only need 20% of what you've been selling.
Yeah,
sure,
and it'll probably be 10%. 5 years from now.
But it's really tough because a lot of the farmers listen to the agronomists who are often on the payroll of the chemical companies that these new startups are going to displace. There's a lot of friction there.
But ADM is the largest grain buyer on the planet.
Yep.
And they are, in the last 6 months with FBN, they paid $8 million to farmers who grew their crops with less carbon. And it was just a pilot. And so a pilot of that size is going to grow, and as farmers come onto that platform, they're going to get all kinds of benefits and improve those margins, which have been historically very, very, very slim.
I used to live in the Bay Area. I don't live around here anymore. I live in Monterey County, and I live amongst farmland. I live amongst thousands of acres of strawberries and basically the salad bowl of the nation. That still looks like 18th century, could be a impressionistic painting of people picking stuff in a field. So there's lots of room for improvement despite the...
Well, but specialty crops like strawberries versus row crops of the heartland, the margins are so much higher on strawberries that you don't have some of the imperatives to reduce labor costs and things. I mean, it's coming, but the thin margins of row crops of wheat, of corn, of sort of the breadbasket of the world really requires much more automation and shaving every single penny off the cost that you can.
Okay. This is recency bias, and although we've agreed that reports are ineffective,
I didn't say that. I just said it's reports plus.
So you have a report on an interesting technology and a market and application that needs to happen. And although we talked about it 15 minutes ago, which is why I remember it, it's more of an adaptive than a mitigation type of technology. So talk a little bit about, you also said adaptation was not really what you wanted to invest in, but this might, so it's an interesting topic. Tell us about it.
Well, sure. As I mentioned, we started a long time ago, and we didn't want to do adaptation at all. Resilience. We thought, well, let's just invest in more EVs, more solar batteries. We'll fix this problem and we won't have to invest in adaptation. Well, somewhere along the way, we realized, sadly, that that wasn't going to happen. And we do feel that building for resilience, investing in adaptation is not optional. I mean, we have to replant trees. We have to revive natural climate solutions. And we need to address the carnage of, for example, wildfires. Wildfires are, of course, a public health hazard. They destroy natural habitat and biodiversity. We all know.
And they undo the efforts of gigawatts of renewable.
They're a carbon
nightmare.
Just a nightmare. The fires in Canada this summer generated more carbon than the entire industrial profile of Canada. And the fires of 2020 in our state wiped out 15 years of progress. And if wildfires were a country, they'd be ranked number 4 behind China, US, and India in terms of carbon emissions. So this notion that we don't do anything about it, or that we use 20th century tools, we use helicopters left over from the Vietnam War to fight our fires, which is what some states do. I mean, it's just insanity. And so we are able to develop technologies that, in terms of sensing where fires are, bringing AI and cameras and sensors,
drones, you said, right?
Unmanned helicopters that can drop fire retardant in minutes as opposed to hours. The Moore Foundation in San Mateo County, where you used to live, which experienced a very major fire a few years ago, they did a study showing that for every 15 minutes that you get to a fire 15 minutes earlier, you save billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. If
15 minutes.
Yeah. And so imagine if you get there in 15 minutes when a fire is small. And there's a company in Alameda that's doing that called Rain that we're both invested in, working with, of all things, the largest military companies, because when you think about a target in warfare, we're increasingly we're not putting humans in the line of fire as much as we used to. We're using drones and automated solutions because we're able to sense where the target is and as it changes, go after it. That's exactly what we have to do in wildfires. So rethinking and using technology can prevent the loss of life, prevent the damage to our planet, but also be a huge carbon improvement technology. And that's an area that no one has really thought about until recently.
Okay. In our last few minutes here, one, I want to ask the same question that Jeff asked is, what haven't we covered? What would you like? What's the last point you'd like to make? And Elaine, what would you tell entrepreneurs? You said there's more money than there's more. What did you say?
I said there's more money than projects.
There's more money.
I mean, yes, and there's a lot of funding opportunities, and it's really hard to navigate the DOE website. I get it. And so, I am happy to be able to field questions and things like that. But I think, there are opportunities for everyone. So if you're an entrepreneur, I know a lot of people think, okay, well, we're looking at TRL 6 or later. But even if you're not eligible for some of the funding opportunities, a lot of these are competitive grants. So that's free money, tax credits, obviously loans from the loan programs office. They do have their criteria, but even if you're not necessarily eligible, maybe your state is, or your utility is, or your manufacturers that you partner with are, it will all trickle toward our industries. And so it's really important that people take advantage of all of these incentives that are currently in play, because it's a historic amount. Just in the next 6 months or so, it's more than like 43 billion. That's just right now. I mean, we've already deployed 67 billion. So there's a ton, and that's not even including the loan program. So
the $400 billion loan.
The $400 billion loan programs office, that's different. Obviously, that's loans, and their scale is a little differently too, and you do pay those back. But the point here is that in order to get to the 300 billion plus per year of private sector investment, we need to be creating more projects and getting more demand. And this requires not just VC and PE, but also the lower cost of capital, large institutional investors who are working at that 100 billion plus scale. We need to de-risk as much as possible. So the government is really working hard to try to make sure that the private sector can become that force multiplier that it needs to be, right? We say, the clean energy transition is private sector led and government enabled. So, we can't do this alone. We really are looking for partners and allies.
Mona, some last words?
Yeah, no, I think one of the things we talked about before that we didn't really talk about so much now is you asked me if we had we would ever entertain, portfolio company, encourage a portfolio company to try to get some of that money, et cetera. And I said, oh my God, of course we would. It's non-dilutive funding. Why wouldn't we do that? But, one of the things that I would say is historically, government has always put their hand on the scale in different ways to get technology going. We are in Silicon Valley, and the semiconductor industry for which it is named was enabled by the US government and the investments that were made at places like Stanford, et cetera, and building up that industry. And so for that to continue today makes tons of sense to me. And I think it's really what I would encourage entrepreneurs to do is think about what's the right capital for where I am on the risk scale. What are the different sources? Because I think what we're definitely still seeing sometimes is entrepreneurs, particularly in the post-2021 boom, raised what they could, weren't conscious enough about what are the milestones? How am I going to de-risk this? Being really conscious about what you can de-risk and what kind of capital is available to de-risk at every stage is really important. But lean into those subsidies.
I mean, we're all so supportive of what the government is doing in terms of bringing more capital to bear, and non-dilutive capital is always welcome. I think that because we're in such a difficult market environment, that we need to balance sort of the availability of billions of dollars to help with our transition with the harsh reality that the markets, they want you to be very cash efficient. They want you to have not just, when Tesla went public in 2010, the Model S didn't come out till 2012. I mean, there were no real cars there. That wouldn't happen today. I mean, the public markets, no matter how many billions of dollars you've gotten from wherever, if you don't have revenues and you don't have profits or the ability to generate profits in the near term, you're not going to be able to access what are the most efficient sources of capital, which are the public markets. So there's a huge reset that's happened, and we're just learning how to mesh, the largesse of the government period with the very, very Spartan public markets.
All right. It's late. Mona said it was past her
Totally.
bedtime.
This is pajama
I was going to
time.
wear pajamas to the thing. Was so much more to talk to, but and Nancy, you came here from San Francisco at an awards event, and you're going on a red eye to the East Coast after this?
No,
All right.
I cut out
Cancel
the
that.
red eye.
All right. Well, thank you for. She was dressed in a fancy formal ball gown, and she changed in the taxi on the way here. No, that didn't happen. Anyway, Nancy, Elaine, and Mona, thank you so much for this engaging conversation. Thank you. Nick, are you going to give us final words? There he is. That's not Nick, that's Julian. Okay. All right.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, final words. Y'all can get. Can we hear it again for the panel? That was. Oh yeah. Okay, public service announcement.
I did happen to find somebody's cute little pair of reading glasses on the ground out there. So they're up at the box office. If those belong to you, before you go, please grab them.
Yeah, and just wanted to say thank you all for sticking it out into the night. At this point, flow batteries have nothing on your energy duration. And that means some of you read Canary Media. So, okay, that's great. This was a blast. As I said, first time doing this in the Bay Area. Biggest and best live event yet. There will be more. So please stay in touch with the people you met. Come up with some great ideas and projects and solutions to climate change. And maybe we'll see you again here sometime. Thanks for coming.
Have a great night, everybody.